Hello, and thank you for joining us for the sixth annual Global Summit on Kidney Disease Innovation, Vox Populi. The time is now to prevent and cure kidney disease. This summit is hosted by the American Association of Kidney Patients in partnership with our allies from the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health. My name is Lisa Baxter, and I am a national ambassador from the state of New York in the United States. I am also a kidney transplant recipient. I have polycystic kidney disease. I've been a social worker for 25 years and a health campaign manager for almost 5 years. Okay, and I am a warrior and a survivor. Yes. And being part of the AAKP since forever and such a long time, I have been allowed to work with other people. I have been educated by them, and I have been able to reach so many people that I haven't been able to reach before. So I appreciate that AAKP being my family. I could call them family now. Okay. This year, the Global Summit theme is Vox Populi, was purposely and strategically chosen by AAKP for historical meaning, voice of the people. I am one of the people who has chosen to raise voices in support of greater care, choices, and innovation in the kidney care. And I am one of the voices demanding to change in the status quo the status quo kidney medicine. Over 850 million individuals across the world have kidney disease. This number is increased as an estimate of 5 to 7% annually. Every year, we lose thousands of innocent lives to preventable kidney issues and the lack of time, access to treatment. AAKP AAKP believes kidney disease is both a workforce and a health issue. The disease takes a devastating toll on human lives and livelihood. Mm. Most people understand that kidney disease left undetected and untreated can lead to premature death. Mm. But many are not aware that its impact a person's dignity and ability to provide for themselves and their families. Kidney disease and outdated treatment can lead to unemployment, disabilities, dependency. In 2019, AAKB declared the next 10 years the decade of the kidney. Yes, the decade of the kidney. The time is now for kidney patients, consumers, healthcare professionals, um, healthcare professionals, researchers, industry, and all people of goodwill to unite our voices and demand change. We are optimistic. We can and will save more lives. But to do this, we must demand new screening, guidelines, and diagnostic, new biologics, and new devices. Together, we can solve this growing global public health crisis. The time is now for elected and appointed leaders worldwide to listen to patient voices. Governments must remove the regulatory and payment barriers they created that delay innovation and prevent timely care access. If government fails to act, we must raise our voices and demand an end to negative government determinants of health. Make no mistake. Every nation is impacted by kidney disease, and millions of people are at risk. The optimistic news is that every person watching this program today can can help those impacted by kidney disease make an impact within their own nation. Through AAKP Global, AAKP is educating patients, care partners, health professionals, and, and policy leaders across the world on unmet patient needs. Our annual global summit, One Kidney Disease Innovation, has helped put a human face on what is now the 10th leading cause of death based on from the World Health Organization. We have connected people across the global in a common purpose larger than any one person or nation. Together, we have increased hope and optimism. Mm. So, thank you for joining us. Your voices is the voice of the people. It's the voice of the people, and you can count on AAKP to keep amplifying it throughout the world to create change. With that, I am honored to serve as the moderator of our session entitled Advancement in Dialysis Care, Access, Innovation, and Safety. It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker for this session, Tammy Gilon, the CEO and founder of Laminate Medical. Ms. Gilon began her career in medical devices as an engineer for Valtech, which developed solutions for mitral valve repair valve repair, mitral valve repair. Soon after leaving Valtech, she pursued her own devices ideas and eventually founded Laminate Medical with Dr. Eel Orion. Errol Orion in 2012 to help surgeons make better functional fistulas. She led the engineer and design effort in the early days of the company to create Val Vasq Q, laminate flagship products. Since then, she has raised tens of millions of dollars from a diverse array of investors to build a global team that is bringing VasQ markets around the world. It's my pleasure to welcome Miss Gilon to our program.
Thank you, AAKP, for the opportunity, and thank you, George Washington University, for supporting this conference. I'm here today to tell you about Vascu and Laminate, the company that I co-founded 12 years ago in Israel. Our mission in Laminate is to create better fistulas or functioning fistulas for patients on hemodialysis. Probably most of you know there are several alternatives in order to create dialysis access for patients on hemodialysis, where the most common and preferred method is by an AV fistula, quite a simple surgery that is created in the arm, where a vascular surgeon typically connects between a vein and an artery to allow blood flow to go out to the dialysis machine, be filtered, and returned when it's clean and filtered to the venous system again. Unfortunately, since COVID, we've seen the numbers deteriorating more and more as a result of more exposure of patients for CVCs, central venous catheters, rather than AV fistulas, which are again considered to be the gold standard for patients on dialysis. The numbers of infections, complications, and as a result, mortality rate for patients have been growing. And this has even made our mission more important to provide more functioning fistulas for these patients and reduce catheter days for patients on hemodialysis in order to reduce complications and improve quality of lives for patients. When I started the company 12 years ago, I started with learning the literature, learning what literature was already established, which publications were around, and the surgery of AV fistula has been done in the same way for the past 60 years, which means that 12 years ago, there was a lot of data already in the literature, which was showing what do these fistulas look like, what does the standard of care looks like, and what are the problems that are actually leading to the failures of these surgeries. Because although being the gold standard, as I said, for dialysis access, the mission of our company is to improve the poor success rates of these surgeries that are created for patients. So we started with looking at computational fluid dynamics and see how does a fistula without any support, without any device, without any technology, what does it look like? And we've seen this connection, the junction that you see here between the vein and the artery. And then we learned the factors of failure that lead to these unsuccessful fistulas, which are in existence for 60 years. So we've been seeing an increased wall tension, a very high tension, which is coming from the artery to the vein, and the vein has to accommodate this tension. We see altered configuration. You can imagine that when you're taking a vein and an artery that are blood vessels that engineered in a completely different way, you're creating a geometry which is not straightforward in this area. So we thought that this is something that we should improve. And the last parameter that actually leads to failure was the unstable flow profile. The flow profile, the flow regime in the artery is very different than the flow in the vein. And when connecting artificially between these two blood vessels, you're actually exposing the vein to a very problematic flow pattern and environment. What you see here is a 1 year post-creation fistula. This is a very common imaging of a fistula 1 year post the creation. You see that the vein gets very narrow. So it's completely impossible for blood to go through this very thin vessel and actually feed the fistula for dialysis. And this is exactly our mission at Laminate. These are the kinds of problems that we want to solve. The results here that you see are taken from the landmark studies that have been done in this segment for patients. So these are all studies without any technology, past 60 years, standard of care, procedures for patients, just a simple connection between the vein and the artery, what's called the standard of care fistula. You see that over 2,700 patients are represented within these studies. These are the leading studies by the leading authors, predominantly here in the US. 7 studies that are represented here, as you can see, and the range of the functional success, the functionality, the usability of these fistulas to be used for dialysis ranges between 40 to 72%, which means that almost 30% of these patients are not able to be dialyzed through the fistula, which means that they, by definition, need an alternative, either a CVC, a catheter, or a graft, and the rest actually need a lot of maintenance in order for the fistula to be working for them. So again, this is a good framing of our mission, the characteristics and the root causes that lead to failures, and what we were about when we started the design of Vascu. Another problem, which you are well aware of, I assume, is gigantic fistulas and aneurysmal fistulas that are developing over time. Sometimes it can take 2, 3, or 4 years for a patient to develop such a clinical phenomenon. But look at these high rates of fistulas that actually get aneurysmatic. One of the problems is that the fistulas that are working and are functioning maintain very high blood flow in order to feed the dialysis treatment to a level which is challenging to cap and to actually control these gigantic fistulas. The problems that you see here could be either aesthetic or to involve pain as well for patients, which obviously affect the quality of lives. And this is another indirect result of the poor success rate of fistulas that we at Laminate want to solve and to improve better outcomes for patients. The Vascu device, which is made out of nitinol that you can see here on the screen, contains two parts, the braid and the brace. Has these two little eyelets that hug the artery from below. And this design with different sizes, we have 6 different sizes, actually fits to any anatomical location where you're doing an end-to-side fistula in the arm of a patient. So we've seen these devices being implanted from the wrist area, the proximal radiocephalic, in the upper arm, or even upper in the arm towards the shoulder, which is called the brachiobasilic location. Let me show you how this is incorporated into the surgical procedure with a short animation video. So this is the Vascu device again. And the first step of the procedure will be choosing the appropriate anatomical location to create the fistula. The surgeon exposes the vein and the artery. This is the vein. The next step would be sizing the blood vessels, both the artery and the vein, in order to choose the appropriate size of Vascu to be used. This example, you can see that number 2 fits well. This has too much room, the number 3. The vein is being deflated in order to mimic blood flow with it. In this case, it will be the number 3 device, as you were able to see. So our algorithm would choose the bigger size, which means 3 in this case. The device will be threaded on the vein just before the normal routine suturing between the vein and the artery. So we haven't changed anything for the surgeon from the routine procedure that they're used to doing for the past 60 years. And after this suturing, anastomosis is created, the device is being deployed on the junction area, on the anastomosis. These 2 eyelets that you see, as I said before, are hugging the artery from below. And this is what it looks like. A very simple procedure that adds this structural reinforcement to the fistula and helps it maintain for the long term. This is where the dialysis needles are cannulating the vein. This is actually above the device, proximal to the device. So with the device, going back to the animations that you've seen earlier, imagine that you're taking this device and actually deploying it outside, external to the blood vessels, to the vein and the artery, the fistula. This is called a supported fistula. You can now see what's provided, what are the benefits of the support for the fistula. So we provide structural reinforcement for the vein to help it accommodate the high wall tension that we spoke about earlier. We retain the right geometric configuration between the vein and the artery in order to allow the right angle, the right radius, the right tapering of the vein, which also controls the flow regime. And we allow for more stable flow as I said, from the taper transition of the vein. All of these parameters were incorporated into the vascular device in order to support fistulas from day zero, from when the fistula is created. The results and the benefits, these are things that we already see in the short term, but 1 year post-creation, as you can see in the right side of the slide, we are expecting to see an open and functioning fistula over time. This is just an additional imaging from a patient, actually a patient in Hamburg in Germany, that shows you what this taper transition look like. You can see that the diameter of the vein, which is measured here, coming from 0.37 to 0.48, and in the other fistula, changing from 0.36 to 0.54, is actually increasing like a conical configuration. You can also see the radius on the right side of the right fistula, which is created by the brace, by the rigid part of the device. And this is exactly the parameters that are affecting the laminar flow that we see over time. So we've talked until now a lot about theory behind the device, the physics, the assumptions that we had to take about the physiology and the biology of the blood vessels. But the bottom line is, what does it look like in clinical outcomes? Were these hypotheses actually proving themselves and being translated to better outcomes? And the answer is yes. So again, what you see in the left side of the screen are the landmark studies that we've talked about earlier that represent the real world data of patients. What do fistulas look like in terms of functional success? How many of them are actually functioning and usable for dialysis? In the right side of the screen, you can see a representation of 559 patients represented in 9 different studies that were published. All of them included vascu. All of these fistulas included the implantation of a vascu device. You can see that the range of functional success for these fistulas is between 87 to 100%, significantly higher than what you see in the left in the landmark studies that are represented the past decades of outcomes of fistulas. This is a very, very significant difference. And this is, by the way, what picked up the interest by large number of physicians that are now using the technology around the world. So it took us a few years to collect this data, to educate the market and the clinical community in order to see the benefit in this new technology. But with this robust set of data that we can present here to you today, we believe that this can actually be revolutionary for patients on dialysis. Additional results which were exciting and we were able to see with Vascu in our pivotal study towards FDA approval in the US. We've looked at maturation procedure, which means reinterventions, patients that are going back to the hospital to get a balloon angioplasty intervention, a stent intervention in order to maintain the fistula open, things that you are very well aware of that and you the patients are undergoing on a daily basis. What we've seen with Vascu is a significant reduction in maturation procedure. Maturation procedures are again defined as procedures that are maintaining the maturation ability of the fistula to be cannulated, to start dialysis. Another advantage that we've seen is shorter median days to first use. As you probably know, when a surgeon creates a fistula to his patient, the patient has to wait for the fistula to mature. With Vascu, we've seen better flows and hence shorter time to actually start dialysis. This is really, really significant, going back to what we've said earlier about the exposure to catheters, which is fatal for patients. As long as you can get to a fistula as your vascular access as soon as possible, this will reduce the exposure to catheter days and to being on a catheter exposure. Additional benefits that I would like to share with you with the extravascular support for patients were actually represented in a very interesting study that we ran with CMS claims data in the US. We've compared CMS claims data of fistulas that were done by the same surgeons at the same centers in the US And we looked at a couple of metrics, starting from catheter exposure post-equation, where we've seen unusual reduction, very nice reduction of catheter exposure at 6 months post-equation of the fistula. Another one was measuring the infection that was resulting in hospitalization, which is significant, as we all understand, for patients. We've seen a significant reduction for patients who were implanted with vascular. More fistulas were functioning, which means fewer catheters were needed and less exposure to infections for these patients. The last metric that we've been looking at was the incidence of aneurysms post-creation, which we talked about earlier. In this metric, 2 years, we've seen also a significant reduction to patients that were undergoing procedures by the same surgeons at the same hospital. So, very apple to apple like comparison. So why does my surgeon not have Vascu yet? As of today, we're active only in 8 centers in the US, and we're looking to broaden the network. We've already commercially launched, but without reimbursement, without the recognition of CMS to these procedures, this will be a very limited expansion of the technology. So CMS has yet to issue a code and payment to cover the cost of Vascu, and this is still under review by CMS. Just as a highlight, CMS has two programs today for new procedures, which allows you for permanent code and payment for years ahead. And if you're a new device and you're not changing the procedure, you're eligible for a 3-year temporary code, which is called TPT, and payment. This is what we're eligible for because we're a new device which is not significantly changing the procedure. So CMS has tried to decide these questions since September 2023 when we got our FDA de novo approval. And patient impact is unfortunately does not take into consideration into their decision. Hopefully, CMS will find a way to categorize new devices like ours, which are so important for patients and carry low risks and major benefits, as you were able to see, and find the right bucket to provide the surgeons the right coding and payment structures to work with for the benefits of their patients. So the conclusions, we were able to show that Vascu supports and retains the optimal AVF configuration hemodynamic profile. Vascu also demonstrates consistently greater AVF functional success with fewer secondary procedures, which are very valuable for patients, lower incidence of CVC-related infections and aneurysm formation over the long term, and a reduced cost to the taxpayer when reducing and calculating all of these advantages for the patients from a clinical perspective. Without CMS action, unfortunately, devices like Vascu may not be an option for dialysis patients. And this is why we're doing everything we can to make the right effect on CMS and categorize these devices into the right bucket of procedures to allow patients better quality of lives. Thank you very much for the opportunity again, and I'm happy to address any questions that you may have on the technology or our future plans in the US.
Thank you, Ms. Gilon, for sharing with us the great work of Laminate Medical, which is advancing access and innovation to improve dialysis care. I'd now like to ask you a few questions. In 2019, AAKP declared the next 10 years the decade of the kidney to build global patients and attend support for innovation in kidney medicine and to meet unmet patients' needs. Can you tell us, do you think we are closer today to addressing the innovation needs of patients that we were 10 years ago?
So thank you for the question. I think that there is a lot of willing in order to improve innovation and allow more accessibility for patients for new technologies. However, I do feel that in the past decade, the regulatory and the reimbursement hurdles have become even more stringent and hard for companies. Innovation historically is usually created by small companies and not by large companies, which makes it even more difficult for new real innovation to come into market, where you have to sponsor such long processes with the FDA, for instance, the new regulatory systems in Europe as well under the MDR, and reimbursement systems around the world. So I think that there are two processes that are happening in parallel. One is um, more development in technology in other worlds and indications as well that are affecting good progress in kidney innovation as well. But at the same time, more and more hurdles and challenges that are preventing technologies from coming to the market. I'm all hopeful that the first channel, of development, innovation, and novelty will win. I'm not sure that today we're in a better place than we were 10 years ago, but I know that there is a lot of things that are happening these days around the scenes. And hopefully, the next 2 or 3 years are going to be formative for dialysis patients.
The theme of this global summit is Vox Populi, in recognition of how important the voice of the patients are to transforming kidney care. Can you tell us how patients have been involved across the product development life cycle of your device? How have patients influenced your thinking and determination as a business leader working to make this device available to patients?
Yes, so I think that first of all, in defining the benefits of the device and the features and the priority of the elements that we wanted to incorporate it in the design was looking at um, patient first. So if we had to choose between benefits for the system, which means the doctors, the nurses, which are obviously very important as well, sometimes there is a clash between the patient need and the system needs. So when you look at the needs from in a very clear overview, not being cynical and not taking under consideration financial considerations, you can see what's beneficial for the patient. In our case, I think that the fact that we're reducing the exposure to CVCs that have been a consensus, that it has been a consensus that CVCs are inferior to fistulas. This has been our mission ever since. And even if we could have added and researched other data points, this was the most important one for patients, hence most important one for us. Over the years, we've been talking with our surgeons and getting patient feedback. How do the benefits of the technology affect patient lives in terms of, do you feel the device? Do you have any pain? When we were looking at aesthetics and preventing megafistulas and aneurysms, this is also something which is very beneficial for the device. We want these arms to look good. This is important. I mean, the price here is important. We don't want patients to pay this price. So definitely when characterizing the needs and the hierarchy of priorities of the technology, we see patients first with the vascular device.
And finally, oftentimes, we have found that government officials involved in regulatory and payment decisions related to kidney drugs, devices, and diagnostics do not understand unmet patients' needs as well as patients or leaders in medical innovation. If you could give a message to the government leader around the world about what you have learned about patients and why government leaders should be more responsive, what would that be based on your company experience?
My message is very clear. I think that if there's a technology which carries low risks for patients and potential benefit, which has been researched and shown, the government and any extension of it should do any effort to allow accessibility of patients to these drugs, diagnostics, or devices. This is the only way to have access for these patients to these technologies. The CMS example, which I shared earlier, is exactly this. There is a code for a new procedure. There is a less desirable code for new devices. It's very random. Where do you fall? We don't want to change the procedure for surgeons. We want to bring something new, which is a device, not to touch the procedure, to make it easier for surgeons. And we want the government, in this case CMS, to see the patient, to see the benefit, and find the right way to categorize and provide reimbursement and payment for this technology. The bottom line is, and the message is that you have to see the patients. If there are no risks and there are benefits, find the right way to make it work.
Thank you again, Ms. Gilon, for your participation in the Global Summit.